All right, it is 2 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us again for the second part of this seminar by Dr. Donna Dean. As a few reminders before we jump into things, we're going to ask that everyone mute their microphones so that we don't get too much background noise. It looks like everyone already is, but just to keep an eye on that. Additionally, we're asking that everyone save questions until the end, so you can either hold on to your question and ask it at the end of the talk, or post it in the chat and we'll get back to it later. There's also an anonymous board where you can post questions. I'll post a link to that into the chat if you'd prefer to use that. And again, we'll address all of those questions at the end of the talk. So again, we'd like to thank Dr. Donna Dean for joining us from the American Chemical Society. She has a prolific record of research and mentoring achievements and many awards, a fellow of the AAAS, of the American the Association for Women in Science, and many awards for mentoring and service work to promote women and underrepresented groups in science. So thank you for joining us again, and take it away.
Thank you, and welcome to the second seminar in the area of becoming a better mentor and mentee. For those of you who were here last week, there will be very little duplication from what we talked about last week. And for those of you who were not here last week or saw last week, this one can also stand alone. So today, I'll give a bit of a heads up. There are a lot more words on my slides this week than there were last week for those of you who participated last week. So don't feel that you have to try to grab every word on my slides, because Anna will post these. These will be posted. The presentation will be posted along with the PowerPoint slides, so you can access those after the webinar. So last week and this week, we're really thinking about what the framework is for a mentoring relationship. And if you conceptualize a mentoring relationship, whether you're a mentor or a mentee, there are really four questions that you're thinking about in that relationship. Is why are you doing it? What do you expect as an outcome of that particular mentoring relationship? And how is it going to be done, and when are you going to do it? So the concepts that I'll be talking about are equally applicable to whether or not you're in a mentoring role or a mentee role, since throughout our careers we're should be always in both of those roles as they change back and forth. So sometimes the slides will have the words mentor, sometimes you will see the slides mentee. So depending whichever perspective you're watching the seminar in today, as the questions and concepts are presented, sort of look at it both from your perspective as well as the perspective of the other partner in the mentoring relationship. So while we're grappling with the issues of mentoring relationships, what I'm talking about is predominantly in this one when you're having a one-on-one conversation with someone in a mentoring relationship. So it's something where we're never too old, never too young to be mentored or be a mentee, or to be a mentor. And we also all have various kinds of wisdom that we can share with one another. The point I would like to make is that all of us should have a board of directors, of mentors. One person is not going to meet all of our mentoring needs. So as you're thinking about your mentoring needs, what you feel you might need to mentor, be mentored on, be thinking of what you feel that person might be able to give you and what that person might not, and how you might reach out to identify other mentors. And as well, most importantly, if you are a mentor or in a mentoring role, please do not fall in the trap that you can be everything all of the time to your mentees, that you can possibly meet every possible mentoring need they have. And again, three good questions that are always good to have in the back of our mind as we're moving through any mentoring relationship, in fact, even life in general. are those things maybe you need to stop doing, those things you need to start doing, and those things you need to continue doing. I'm going to get into some specifics that sort of draw out what some of those concepts are, and I just call it a mentoring toolkit. There have been a lot of people who study the philosophy of mentoring, sort of the theory of mentoring, and those kinds of things. And so I've kind of put together what I consider a sort of a toolkit for mentoring that sort of draw from the people who study the theory of mentoring. And one subject matter area of mentoring can be the content mentoring. That is things you need to know, things that are really related to what you want to be in your career, and where you want to, if you're a mentee, you would want to know what your gaps in knowledge and skills are. You'd want to find out maybe there are additional training opportunities or ways that you can learn things that you need to learn. Find out resources. Content is helping you figure out the goals in a mentoring, obviously developing a plan to accomplish those goals, and progress the monitoring. And the important thing for the mentor is the ability to step aside and allow the mentee to pursue some of these things independently. And there are two questions that you all posed in advance, and I'll try to address these as I come across some of these topics. One question was, if you're not making satisfactory progress, how would you approach the topic with your supervisor? Well, I think that's one area where you might identify where you might feel there are gaps in maybe the progress on the project, or maybe you feel that for some reason you're not making satisfactory progress, and identifying why you think you're not making progress. And then I'll have some more topics a little bit later about how you might want to approach the supervisor. And the other thing, if you have ideas that you want to bring to your supervisor, again, it will be a matter of timing and how you do that. So we'll come back to those concepts. But the content mentoring is sort of in the area, if you think about in your career, like, I need to know this. I need to know these sort of things now, and I don't know them, and I don't know how to find out where I can learn about these sorts of things. So that's in general what the experts call content mentoring. There is another facet which you might call content mentoring, but it's really about your career development, your professional development along your trajectory. And that is also identifying mentoring in the perspective of being mentored to learn out what the opportunities and connections you are that need to make. If you're a mentor, that means there are ways that you can point your mentee to things that mentee should be doing outside the institution or inside the institution. It could be as simple as perhaps pointing out, it's probably really important that you go to the weekly seminar series that we have. You might want to volunteer to give a weekly seminar. So that's kind of like promoting, would be a role where a mentor could promote the mentee. There are other things that one can learn how to identify protected time. How do you have the time to do what you need to do in your lab? How do you sector out the time? How do you identify time windows that you need to do what you need to do? Again, that's an area you can be mentored on. Learning how to go through the system that you find yourself working in, whether it's the institution or the discipline, those are all things that are related to your professional development. And of course, a really important role, specifically for someone who is in a mentoring function, is that you want to model ethical behavior to your mentees and show them. If you excuse me, I'm going to cough a moment. I do not have COVID. It's just we have a lot of allergies where I live now, a lot of things in the air. So career professional development are kind of those ancillary skills that you might need to know. It could be something like you know, it's really important it's really important that you go to this professional meeting, or it's really important that you develop collaborations with these sort of people. See, this is beyond the content knowledge that you need to have about you. This particular facet has to do with what are those kinds of things you should be doing in your networking and interacting with others. And then there is another area of mentoring that is very individualistic, both from the mentor's perspective and the mentee's perspective. And it's what, again, the experts who study mentoring philosophy call psychosocial support. That can be work-life issues, time management, you can, what your leadership skills are, certainly cultural diversity, and certainly aspects of someone who may be the only one of their type in the group. They may be the only female in the group, the only male in the group. They may be the only physicist in a group of biologists. They may be the only LGBTQ person. They may be the only African American. They may be the only whatever. They may be the only graduate student. Everybody else might be a scientist. All of that it relates to cultural diversity, and that is something that we do want to support one another. And serving as a role model. It isn't just the mentor who can be a role model. The mentee, particularly if you're at an earlier career stage, can be a role model of what a good postdoc does, or what a good graduate student does, or what a good staff scientist does, you know, projecting a professional demeanor. And peer mentoring very often can be those people who are, you know, at the same career stage that you're at. You share a lot of things in common. You may want to peer mentor one another. If you are postdocs, I can remember when I was a postdoc, those of us who were postdocs in the department that I was in, we sort of encouraged each other. We sort of prodded each other when it was time to begin looking for positions, as we could see the end of our postdocs. We shared our draft resumes with one another. We did practice interviewing with one another. And that really was peer mentoring. I didn't think of it as peer mentoring at the time. But all of those can be important. This doesn't mean that every mentor has to do all of these things for a mentee. And it's very much part of the individual relationship that you might have. So those are kind of the general areas, if you think broadly about the subject matters that you might need mentoring in. And mentoring can basically be anything. You know, it can be about anything that you need to help you with your profession, since this is in the context of a professional society and a professional group that we're doing this seminar. Some of the experts also have talked about, they talk about in general 4 stages conceptually about mentoring. And obviously the initiation means when you're getting started in the relationship, when you are establishing yourself together. I will have several slides that go in depth on each of these 4 topics. And so the initiation and how you start that mentoring relationship. The cultivation means what are you doing as you are sort of in the throes of an effective mentoring relationship, when things are working, after you've gotten to know each other? What are the kind of things that should be happening to maximize the experience for both of you? And then the separation means when, for whatever reason, the relationship is changing, when there may be you're going to different places, or you have moved on from the need for that mentor. And sometimes there is a phase where one can need to redefine what the mentoring relationship is. You can think about this either as a linear path, that is a linear path that takes you one way in a timeline with someone, and you do stages 1 to 4, and then after you've done that, you're through and you don't go back. Other times you can think of this as a circle where you are continuing to go through these cycles with your mentor and mentee. But in the initiation, this is very important part of the initial conversations that you begin to have with one another. on that, what your expectations are, what your motivations are, the strengths, the needs. If you're you're the person that needs mentoring, what you think you need, what you think your strengths are, looking at thinking about what didn't work in the past in any mentoring relationships you have. You want to really identify what some good points of connection and common ground that the mentor and mentee can share initially. It can be anything. I mean, it could have been that you grew up in the same part of the world. It could be that you both were the first in your family to get a PhD or a master's or a bachelor's. But finding some common ground helps you establish a basis. In that phase, you want to begin to figure out, okay, what are our goals? What do the two of us need to accomplish in this relationship? You need to learn your communication. What are your communication styles? What works? And how do you learn? Are you visual? Are you verbal? Do you want to read it? All the different ways. And then there should probably be some sort of assigned tasks, not in the way that we think of academic assigned tasks, but the mentor might say, okay, great, I'd like you to just make a list of what you think you want to reflect on, prioritize what you would like us to initially work on. In other words, all kinds of things where you're doing the self-reflection, thinking about what you want to gain from that particular mentoring relationship. And of course, from the mentor's perspective, what's in it for the mentor? Then obviously the mentor wants to have a mentoring relationship with someone that they think that it's going to benefit the mentee. If they feel that it isn't going to benefit the mentee, or if you don't, as a mentor, have the potential to help what the mentee needs, then you might need to articulate that. But from the mentor, particularly if it's a very busy person, which we're all busy, the mentor isn't going to want to waste their time working with someone who is not responsive, who's not interacting, who's not putting in 50% of the effort in the relationship. Being open to the times and places of how you're going to interact, the virtual world. And in that initiation phase, you're also thinking about your expectations and what positive experiences those are going to be. So for example, it might be that you as the mentee want to be a better speaker when you're talking about your research at the lab group data reviews. So the mentor maybe could help you practice that or give you some tips. And so a concrete positive experience could be a successful presentation to the lab group and someone saying, hey, that was really good. That was a well put together. The mentor, wants to see that someone can learn and is enjoyable to work with. That doesn't mean we have to be totally fun animals, but that the energy that we're putting into it is energy that is worthwhile. And of course, the mentee has to have some respect for the mentor's competence and ability to provide support, whatever it might be. You don't have to have admiration and respect for everything the mentor does. It just has to be admiration and respect for what particular things you're working with that mentor on. And not only is the initiative balanced, in any mentoring relationship, if you're having conversations, each of you should be listening half of the time and talking half the time. I think the same thing is true in a mentoring relationship. The initiative should probably be evenly balanced and maybe even a little bit more so on the mentee's side. So these are just some tips that sort of pull in those concepts for the initiation stage. Both of you should make a list for the things you want to know. Prepare for what that first meeting is. Just figure out just make a list. maybe at the beginning of the conversation, you can say, okay, well, let's see if we can cover 2 or 3 things today, and then go back and forth of what else would you like to talk about. And then you begin to get to know each other and figure out, okay, how are we going to go on from here? And what are going to be the obstacles we might anticipate? And then, so what are our initial impressions with one another? What are the, what questions do I have about you? So I will give an example. I had an initiation from a one-on-one interaction. It was virtual through Zoom with since I'm a career consultant for the American Chemical Society, for a young chemist. And I had looked her up on LinkedIn. And so I sort of saw where she was in her career. And in the email she sent me, she had said, I want to talk to you about working in government and what I should do at my next, what I should be thinking about. And so I actually jotted down 3 or 4 things that I wanted to ask her. And then when we got together on the Zoom a little bit earlier today, at the beginning we talked about, well, first of all, how much time do we each have? And then we decided the 2 or 3 things we really wanted to be sure that we covered. So we actually went through these steps. And then as we discussed what we needed to discuss, what she needed to know was basically something that we were able to cover in this hour and a half sort of mentoring session, if you will, and that answered all the questions that she had and the things she wanted to deal with. But we talked about what we decided to do. Our goals and expectations are, at this point, is that she's going to get back in touch with me in about 4 months, because there will be some things that will happen professionally during her postdoc. And she said, I'd like to get back in 4 months and reflect. But these are all kinds of things that you think about. I had a few questions for her. She had a number of questions she wanted to ask me specifically about some of my experience in government. So if you think about this category of investigative questions, these are the kind of questions people just tend to ask, how, what, when, who, why, where. Use the data, the kind of things we as scientists ask. We're seeking information past, we're trying to get concrete information upon which we can act. But these are some important, typical investigative questions that can be asked, and the mentee can be thinking about them. If you're a mentor, these are questions you could ask. What's your reflection? You could see the 4 questions there. You could develop your own questions. These are not hard and fast, but these are the kind of concrete investigative questions. So for the person who asked the question that said, I'm not sure I've made satisfactory progress, well, then you could be thinking about, well, here's what I've accomplished. Here's how long I've worked on it. I don't think I'm progressing as fast as I should. Again, very factual kind of investigative questions. The second phase is after we've kind of you've gotten beyond that first step of what you are sort of in general expecting to get from that mentoring experience. This is when you've maybe had a little bit of experience with one another. There's no timeline for it. I mean, it could be your second conversation you get to this stage. It could be that you need 3 or 4 conversations or more just to get through the investigative phase to decide what you want to work on. But here, opportunities, things begin to emerge. Hopefully the mentee is learning, discovering other things, identifying other opportunities, maybe even identifying other mentoring needs that they might have. So just think of it as, just keeping the relationship going. And during that phase, you want to think about the things that, how you're going to be accountable to one another, when you're going to check back in, what the mentor expects from you, the mentee, what you, the mentee, might expect for the mentor. I mean, it could be as simple as saying, I'd really love to be able to check in with you once a week or once every 2 weeks. for you to give me some advice, and maybe it would only take 15 minutes. And then you want to know, if you're going to work together, you want to know what's successful. How are you going to know that you're actually making progress in the relationship? You each have responsibility, and probably as you've worked together, you'll get more of an understanding about what each of you are not going to can or cannot get out of the relationship. If you're a mentee, you will very likely discover limitations that your mentor has. You may, it may be, well, my mentor never really had to go through this really difficult job transition, so they don't have experience in that, so they can't give me an understanding of that. But the mentor has done these other things, and I think sometimes the mentor can understand that maybe the mentee might not be able to articulate yet some of their difficulties they may be facing in their career. The mentee might not see clearly what they think they need to work on. But these are kind of the things that you're making sure the mentoring relationship doesn't go so far off the tracks that there's no progress being made. Again, there's sort of the mentor should support the mentee, challenge the mentee. You want to have sort of a shared vision of what you're intending to conference, and the continuing feedback loop is absolutely important. Well, this really isn't working for me, or Donna, you're my mentor, and it doesn't really, what you've told me about your experience in that arena doesn't really mesh with my experience. So I need to have you help me in a different way. You may decide, well, hey, great, we decided early on this is what we were going to work on, but it looks like we need to work on this whole other facet. So you can think about that. You don't need to constantly renegotiate or make excuses about, well, that's not working. You can always redirect. Again, think of it as in your experiments or your data analysis. If an approach isn't working, you step back and you reconfigure the approach. You don't constantly make excuses about, well, I don't know why this approach isn't working, but you're moving ahead in a forward direction. And again, there are boundaries. Boundaries are very important in these mentoring relationships. If you're in a true mentoring relationship, obviously you don't give gifts to one another. You don't loan money. If a mentor, if someone is involved in a dispute, the mentor doesn't intervene to try to resolve the dispute, whatever it might be. The mentor works with the mentee to give the mentee the tools to solve it for themselves. Whether it's, obviously, if it's a personal life dispute resolution, there are, professional kinds of ways that deal with that. But if there is say a dispute resolution, a dispute going on in the lab on access to materials or access to equipment or scheduling for things, the mentor should not step in and go to the lab director and say, you need to straighten this out because my mentee can't do it. You need to work with the mentee to help them get the tools. I think that's pretty awful. You also need to be comfortable talking about moral or ethical issues, but you need to have the ground rules at the beginning about what is mutually acceptable to each of you for what you talk about. It's not a mentoring relationship at all, but I think this principle should make sense to you. I have a very big extended family scattered all over the U.S., a very widely diverse family, highly diverse in lots of ways, and we have big family reunions every couple of years. There's about 200 of us that get together. Our family, when we get together, we do not talk politics and we do not talk religion. And that's just kind of our mutually acceptable ground rules. We just don't talk politics or religion. And we're all clear on it. We don't have to talk about it. We may talk about, ethical, moral issues, other things. But that's our acceptable ground rule. And so it may be that the ground rule is if you have childcare issues or children, you may not, as the mentee, want to talk about those issues with your mentor. And so your ground rule may be, I don't really want to talk about my personal life at all. I just want to talk with you about the lab. So again, as long as you both understand what those boundaries are, there's no right answer and no wrong answer. It's just what the two of you agree is appropriate. And of course, if you get ready for your meetings, whether they're sitting down having coffee together or, you want to continually review the progress. Here's what we've been working on. Last time we talked about this. Are we moving ahead? Do we think about the next phase that we're going to think about? And of course, this last bullet tells us, things you might want to do, new things you might want to start doing in the mentoring relationship, things you might want to stop doing, things you might want to continue doing so that it continues to be efficient and mutually productive for you. Listen, you need to listen and suspend judgment while someone is talking, whichever role you're in. Suspending judgment is very difficult. Listening deeply, and sometimes listening deeply is listening not only to just what is said or what is communicated, but what is not communicated. And you're listening for understanding. I have mentored people who have career trajectories and views and perspectives on their careers that are polar opposites to what my own views were about my own career. But I could listen and understand why they were making those choices for them, and then help them figure out, given their choices and preferences, how they could do that. When you're in this stage, you want to ask these challenging questions and sort of draw out about what's important to the other person. Again, if you're a mentor, you want to draw out what's really important to the mentee, but the mentee also wants to draw out from the mentor, okay, what do you think is important that you're hearing me say or not say that we need to work on? And of course, all kinds of ways about how you want to build a relationship. In the virtual world, it's a little more difficult, but different processes work for different people and different times and different perspectives. Again, that is what would work best for you. So the discovery questions, unlike the investigative questions, these are questions that sort of go deeper into the need. You're trying to generate the opportunity to learn new things. These in the people, again, who study the theory of mentoring say that most mentoring relationships fail because the mentors don't go into the really important questions to ask them, and the mentees don't have the expectations of their mentors that they will ask them tough questions that focus on them. But you want to be provocative, not in a bad way, but in a good way, because here you're trying to ask the person, well, think about it, make an interpretation on here, and it also helps you understand each mentee's facility with taking risks, how comfortable the mentee is in taking risks, what their own personal boundaries are for taking risks that they want to take. We all have relative levels of risk that we take, and they're different. Again, these are discovery questions. You should probably never ask a question that can be answered with a yes or no. Ask a question, what you thought you learned, all of these you see, and what does it tell you? Well, what could have been the best outcome? What could have been the worst? Well, what do you think the alternatives are? And on the other hand, if you're the mentee, then you can be prepared to say, well, I was thinking this is what went wrong in the lab last week, and I didn't deal with it well. And I think this is what I've learned from it. And I think here's why it didn't go well. And maybe if I had done it this way, interacting with my colleagues in the lab, there might have been a different outcome. So again, it's probing the person to think more deeply about what might have gone on there. And then there are another category of questions that are called, they're categorized as empowering questions. And these are ones that might tend, that I think are designed to sort of push the mentee to go into a little bit more, more depth. As well, the mentee can ask similar type of questions of the mentor, expect more of the mentor, and what you really want to do. So these, you know, the first two, you've got information and you're aware of situations or circumstances that you want to change. And then you have to decide, you know, what outcomes are you after? Well, what are you going to have to do to make it happen? What's your first step? What do you need to make this happen? What are the resources? How are you going to approach this? Again, getting you to think about what you're going to need to accomplish it, and do you have the resources, and how the action is going to get you to that level. And actually, all of these questions can actually be very good as you move through any relationship. At some point in the relationship, the separation means the person may have given all they could give you. You may decide that it's not working, or you've gotten to the point. The mentee may not need guidance. The mentor may not be available anymore. There may be lots of reasons. And the equilibrium may just feel off, and that you can't regain, you know, it doesn't feel like it did in the beginning when you had a lot to mutually share with one another. And if you're open to one another at that time, and can be honest with each other, then you talk about you know, is this mentoring relationship valuable to both of us? Have we gone as far as we can go working together on this? And sometimes the decision may be made that there is nothing more that anyone can do, or it may be you want to redefine it. And if it's been a particularly rich, positive mentoring relationship, obviously you're going to feel a loss. There might be anxiety. Oh my goodness, what am I going to do? There's a number of people that I have actually separated from in the mentoring relationship that I mentored after I left the government. People I still mentored that were there. And I sort of knew the dynamics of the workplace for about 2 to 3 years after I was no longer working there. So I could actually mentor and throw questions to my mentees about how to deal with certain people, actually. Have them thinking about how to dealing with certain supervisors, certain colleagues, certain senior managers that they had to interact with. But at some point, if those managers changed and new people came in those roles, I had no working experience with those roles. So I actually had to say, you know, I'm not sure that I can really help you anymore in dealing with that, because I don't know that circumstance. I don't know the way the system works. And sometimes my mentees said, you know, Donna, since you don't know these people, this is not helpful to me anymore. And so you do feel a loss, but that's just part of it. Sometimes there can be all kinds of reasons, organizational, a geographic reason. Sometimes there can be psychological reasons that you just need to separate from one another. And if you're thinking about it, you as a mentor, you want to help the mentee move on from that relationship. And then sometimes you don't want to drag on the relationship where nothing is happening, you're not making progress on the mentoring relationship. But all of those are phases. And then sometimes relationships fall apart. Sometimes they fall apart in the very early phases. They can fall apart with some people in the initiation phase. You know, mentors can be threatened. They may feel, the mentee may feel they're being undermined. Neither one may be willing to make changes. Sometimes the communication just doesn't take place despite everybody's effort. And sometimes it's just not a good fit, just happens not to be a good fit. Sometimes you can't trust the other person. That goes both ways. Sometimes it can just be simply logistical. And then sometimes it can be just the fact that the mentor can't really understand the mentee, or the mentee doesn't understand the cultural or gender perspective from the mentor. And very importantly, what each expected were not articulated in the beginning. In other words, there was not clarity on what people thought. And then you move into what is a redefinition phase. It may be that particular relationship you don't need. It may be you move on, the new relationship with that person, they might become a peer, they might be someone you say goodbye, have a good life, thank you very much. There may be no continued contact, there may be only limited contact. And if the contact continues once you've finished, it very often becomes just what I would call a professional friendship, someone you know in the profession that you would feel comfortable contacting. And obviously the mentor can stand back and be pleased to see the growth in the mentee, even if the mentee has grown in a different direction than what the mentor. And then, of course, the mentor, hopefully, the energy they invested in that particular mentoring relationship would have gone on to new mentoring relationships. So when you're at the concluding end, you want to bring it to closure. When we finish our PhDs, for example, we do have a moment of closure. It's when we've had our dissertation defense, when we've got our dissertation written, when we file it in whatever legal way we need to file it. That is a very concrete example of closure. In the area of mentoring, it's a much fuzzier, but you can maybe revisit and go back and say, okay, well, great, these are the things we accomplished. Wonderful, glad we accomplished that. We accomplished all of this. We didn't really get this done, but you've identified other people that can mentor you on this. And here's how we're going to go forward. And so some people that my former mentees, I've said, our agreement is go on, have a good life. I have other people that are my former mentees. I've said, well, check in with me once or twice a year. Just let me know how you're doing. Let me know what's up. And then some I'd say, well, let's plan to talk every 4 to 6 months. Just let me know how it's going, or call me anytime you feel you need me. And sometimes you want to move on, sometimes not, but you want to redefine it. So these are kind of general phases that help you if you want to do pencil and paper as you're thinking about your mentoring needs as a mentee. And if you're a mentor, you can think about these, about how you're going to support your mentee in their activities and what they're doing. And so just a few more, what I call a few more tips. Obviously, we're in an era where there is a lot of virtual going on. It's not just mentoring, but it's it's work, it's socializing, it's everything. It's harder, but I think the fact that that so many of us are doing Zoom and Citrix and other kinds of webinars, we're getting a little bit more comfortable with using the technologies. It does mean that you may need to work a little bit harder if you're a mentor, to kind of give them a sense, because certainly if you're more senior or have a more highly visible management or executive role in the organization, your public persona may not really be what you think your own professional persona is. And you really want to figure out how you want to contact, what is reasonable, what will work. Use emails, texts that supplement the phone calls. Schedule what works. It might be a fixed time every week. That's usually a little bit easier if you have fixed times that you both can commit to. And you want to talk about it. Obviously, if you've been emailing back and forth, obviously keep copies of that, have a folder for it. And if for some reason you're engaging in an email exchange back and forth, and one of you has asked the other for something that is a lengthy thought process, and you don't have time at that moment, just say, I'll get back to you early tomorrow morning because I really need to finish up this paper I'm writing today. Just said, I got it. I hope to get back to you by late afternoon tomorrow. Occasionally, it may be very difficult to do this if you can't meet in person. I'm a person who really likes. I'm very much of an introvert, but I also like to meet people in real life and see them in real life, so I can see all of your body language, not just your face on a screen, because that helps me identify if I'm asking a really tough question. And then if neither one of you are really committed to the virtual mentoring relationship, sometimes the miscommunication can happen, particularly if you're just doing it writing back and forth by email or texting, or if you're using emojis or trying to convey a sense. Again, that I think is part of the understanding of whether or not it's appropriate to use emojis, whether or not, I'm not saying it's good or bad, but what works as an effective communication strategy with people. And if it's a very frail commitment that each of you have to it, then obviously it's not going to be quite as successful. I talked a little bit about the peers that are at your same level. They can be at your same professional level, or they can be at your same, organizational level. They can be at your same, could be at your same life level. You could be a senior scientist and you're having your first child, and someone that you work with is a postdoc and they just had their first child. Well, you could have a peer mentoring relationship on parental challenges as a parent, or particularly in this era when people are having to telecommute and work from home. But the peer mentoring can very often also be considered, it's networking. For me, when we're interacting with our peers, the mentoring and the networking to me actually blend very much at this point. And there are a group of 5 people that actually, when I look back on it during my career at the National Institutes of Health, we were actually peer mentors for one another. None of us ever worked for each other. We kind of moved up through management ranks at the same rate. And while we were working, we actually, in many ways, mentored one another and helped each other get through circumstances, including very often some of them telling me, Donna, we were together with you in a meeting 2 weeks ago, and you really angered so-and-so, and you need to do something about it. What are you going to do? Meaning I had angered, quote, highly powerful person in the NIH. But that was kind of peer mentoring. They were telling me something that I was totally oblivious to, and they sort of held my feet to the fire and said, what are you going to do about it? What do you think you ought to do about it? And very often we would connect one another. Well, the interesting thing is now we have all retired and have gone to various different places to live as we've retired, but we still actually network with one another. We have a Zoom call about every 3 weeks, thereabouts, and we're mentoring and networking with one another on all the various things that we're doing in retirement, the community activities we're doing. And early on, we all retired in about a 2.5-year period from one another. Some of our early peer networking was helping each other to leave behind the workplace and to stop worrying about what was going on back where we used to work. And that was very effective for us, continues to be at this stage in life. And I suspect we will continue to mentor one another as inevitably health challenges may happen. But that is a very important role. This, again, just reiterates in different words the things I've talked about. Mentors, want mentees to have some idea of the goals they want to accomplish, some sense of how the mentee would like to proceed. Boundaries, what's off limit, and how you're going to interact. Mentees want mentors to help them, what they need, help them with their skills and abilities, you know, those very important content mentoring, helping them with professional interests, you know, career and professional development, help them with sort of psychosocial things, work-life issues, life partner issues, again, to the extent that you're comfortable. So we used these last week. Again, just a different reiteration of the things. Figure out what your goals are, figure out how you're going to proceed, agree how you're going to interact, give and receive feedback, have goals and plans, review how you're doing on a basis, and continue to seek out new resources. So a few final words, particularly to mentors. It is so easy to think that your best way to help your mentee is to give them answers, give them suggestions, and give them recommendations, as opposed to saying, what do you think you should do? What would you suggest should be your approach? Well, if I were in your shoes and you were in my shoes, what would you recommend I do? Sort of turning that question around. The mentor and the mentee both have a responsibility to do for the communication, and and the different kinds of questions. Again, you don't have to have these as a checklist. Ask all the questions. These can be tailored to your needs, to the mentor, to how you're working, and to what the issues are. So those are my final words, making sure you ask the right questions, because as you ask the questions, they will help you figure out, okay, great, this is the path we want to go down at this point in this mentoring relationship. I thank you very much. I'm on LinkedIn. Several people joined me on LinkedIn after last week's. Thank you for that. And now we're going to have questions, and I am going to stop the screen share. So let me see if I can give a little bit answer and then see if you have some additional questions. So someone said, how to bring one's idea to the superior and to be heard, especially when it comes to change something. Whether or not the superior is your boss, supervisor, or just someone, you know, in the chain of command above you, this might be a good opportunity to do three things come off the top of my head. One would be really think through and articulate in your own mind, maybe on a piece of paper, maybe, you know, electronically, what your idea is, why you have that idea, what evidence you have for why that idea is a good idea or approach. And then you probably want to network with some people who have maybe had interactions with that supervisor to find out what are some good ways to approach that supervisor. What is a good way to approach that supervisor? How do I approach them? When do I approach them? Is there a good time of day? Should I text them? Should I call them? Should I email them? Should I pop in their lab? Should I pop in their office? So you're wanting to maximize your ability to get that person when they're at their maximum degree of receptiveness. And then you will have your question articulated, and you will have reasons why you think your idea is a good idea. As long, you know, particularly if it's going to improve the work, the efficiency of the operation, the efficiency of, you know, supplies, whatever it might be, because you've got a rationale for why you want to do that. The other one was, if you don't feel you're making satisfactory progress, how would you approach the topic with the supervisor? I think a lot of the same, some of the same points I said would apply here. You would think about why you think you haven't been making satisfactory progress. Do a little pre-thinking on what you are considered the benchmarks of not making progress, why you think that's true, and then just saying, I don't think I'm making sufficient progress. It may be that you just have to figure out how that particular supervisor would like you to articulate it. Should you send it by text, by email, by phone call? Should you ask them and say, hey, I'd really like to talk to you sometime about this because I don't think I'm making progress. But thinking about the timing of approaching the person, the style in which you would approach the person, and have as many facts at your hands that you can present. So let me stop there and see if we have, okay, good, you've got the video. Are there any other questions, Mackenzie or Anna? I guess Mackenzie's doing the questions.
Yeah, there are none posted right now. If anyone has questions, feel free to jump in. You can raise your hand on the participants list or type out a question in the chat and we'll get that addressed. While we're waiting for questions to come in, I did have one. Do you have any advice on mentors working in academia who may have mentees, graduate students or postdocs, who want to work in industry or government positions rather than staying?
Yes, I think that that to me is one of the greatest challenges in mentoring for those of us who have not been anywhere other than graduate school and postdocing in an academic institution, because certainly my generation and most of the people that, you know, people even now that are graduate students and postdocs have actually not had experience outside the academic arena. And that is where if you can ask if your mentor, if that supervisor, the person you're working for, is willing to make connections with other people that they maybe went to graduate school with, that they postdoc with, that have gone into other sectors, to provide advice on that. You can do some peer mentoring. If you, other people, do you know someone, if there have been postdocs or graduate students who have been in the lab, you know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that you know have moved on to those arenas, reach out to those people and then ask them, because I have found, never having been in academia other than at the very early phases of my career, I have found that there are a number of disciplines in academia. The professors have great difficulty understanding any life pathways other than being in academia. Some other fields, there has been a fair amount of rotation, you know, among some fields of engineering, business, government, academia. There's a lot of rotation. So a lot of those people have seen the other sides. So I think one-on-one, the professional societies that you belong to might also have some mentoring career resources that you can find. I would say those of us who are ACS career consultants that do this, I would say we find that the highest percentage of people who want to engage with us one-on-one in these mentoring experiences are people who are in academia who are desperately trying to learn what government is like, what industry is like, what going into business for yourself would be like, because they're not getting it from their mentors. And in some cases, sadly, their mentors have devalued them if they want to do something other than go into academia. And so is that a helpful, does that help in your context?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, you can use, I mean, I'm not paid for LinkedIn, and I'm not paid to say anything about them because I get it for free. You know, I just get the free basic LinkedIn. But I have discovered a real transformation in LinkedIn since we've all been social distancing under the pandemic. And at least in the field of chemistry, it has become an incredible tool that chemists are using. In fact, we're having online webinars for members of the Chemical Society to learn how to update, work on their LinkedIn profile, and make connections. You can always use it to find people that went to your undergraduate school. You can use it to find people that went to your graduate school, people that went to the institution where you may be postdocing. And if you make the connections, or you can Google other places, then you can make a connection with someone. So this mentoring experiment, this little interim mentoring that I did today as a result of the ACS career consulting, that was actually a person who is postdocing in academia and actually had 2 or 3 very specific questions about coming and working in the government, in parts of the government that I'm most familiar with. So we actually had a mentoring hour and a half talking about the various opportunities. So continue to reach out through the societies, through the national labs, through the groups that you all are in. You know, you've got a lot of, through this consortium that you're in, to me, there's a lot of very interesting connections that you have, because I was looking at all the parties that are involved in this.
Yeah. Are there any final questions? We're at 3 o'clock now. So this is sort of a final chance for questions. If not, let's thank Donna for giving 2 great talks now and providing so much insight. So thank you for joining us and answering all these questions. Yeah.
Thank you. Have a good career, all of you.
Thank you very much.
And as a reminder, we have another seminar next week that will be on Coulomb dissociation reactions and oxygen